We're going to be in Revelation chapter 10 starting out. We're going to be in chapters 10 and 11 of Revelation, but we're going to be skipping back to Daniel 12 for a little while. Where we are in Revelation, we're going to see a little bit of a change of pace from what we've been talking about. So starting out, obviously, we started clear back in chapter 1, where John is having this vision. He's having a vision of Jesus. It goes on to write letters to the churches, the 7 churches. It goes on to chapter 5, we hear about this scroll with the 7 seals on it, and they needed someone who was worthy to take that. And it's symbolic of the judgments of end times, the 7 seals, and Jesus was the only one who was worthy. And then in chapter 6, we see him start opening these seals. We start seeing what each one represents: the 4 horses, the conquering, the killing, the death, the scarcity, the famines, the cry of the martyrs. We talked about these cosmic events with the sun and the stars and the moon and everything. Chapter 7 breaks from that for a moment to talk about the sealed 144,000 of Israel. Chapter 8 goes back and gives the final 7th seal, and then goes on to the trumpet judgments. We see trumpet number 1, the vegetation was struck. The trumpet number 2 was the seas. Number 3 was the waters. Number 4 was in the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And then in going on into chapter 9, we see continued with these judgments. We see the locusts and these angels released that were bringing judgment. And now in chapter 10, where there's a bit of a pause from these specific judgments. And we're going to see something a little bit different. We're continuing on in John's vision here. But I think God's intention in this gap, because he does come back to the judgments, but for a little while, they're doing something a little different here. And I think part of God's intention is to encourage and remind his people in the midst of all these things that this is him at work. This is for our good. This is, he's sovereign. He remembers his people. He's still in control. We're going to be victorious. He already has the victory. Just because we see and hear these things that are scary sounding and things like that, this isn't an all is lost situation. This is God is breaking down the bad to bring forth a new world, to bring forth the good. So beginning in Revelation 10, starting at verse 1. I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand. And he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. When he cried out, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Now when the 7 thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up the things which the 7 thunders uttered, and do not write them. The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are in it, the earth and the things that are in it, and the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be delay no longer, but in the days of the sounding of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. So something a little different's happened here. All throughout Revelation, John is being given these visions. He's given guidance on the end times. And he's told to write them down and share them with us. And now suddenly they're saying, stop. I want you to seal this up. This isn't for you yet. This isn't for people yet. Seal it up until the end. This is the only part of Revelation where John was stopped from sharing the vision with us. I want to skip back to, well, no, not just yet. So this angel, there's different ideas that people have about who this angel may be. Some think it'll just be a mighty angel. Some have suggested maybe it's Jesus, because it talks about him being clothed in a cloud, as Jesus is described as being clothed in white. I don't think it's likely that this is Jesus. Verse 6, the angel swore by him who lives forever and ever. I doubt Jesus would come down and then swear to himself. And another reason is in verse 1, John writes, I saw still another mighty angel. Now, the word another used here in the original Greek, it literally meant the same kind. It meant, it literally means of the same kind, as in it's another angel or it's another created being, that kind of thing, rather than a deity such as God, such as Jesus. So this could be referring to Michael or Gabriel or another similar angel. In verse 1, in describing this angel, it says that there was a rainbow on his head. What's the significance of a rainbow? What's the promise of the rainbow? That God will never flood the earth again. He'll never destroy the earth by water. So then what is the rainbow a reminder of? Well, for one, it's a reminder of God's faithfulness, but it's also a reminder of where the promise came from. What happened that caused him to make that promise? The whole world had become evil, and that this was his judgment at that time. He destroyed almost everyone and everything on the earth by water in judgment of evil. So it's kind of a reminder that God did that before, and he's in the process of doing it again here. He's in the process of bringing judgment upon the earth that is going to purge wickedness from the earth and make it into something more beautiful, something more holy. God's judgment is going to come upon the wicked of the world again. He's just not using water. And I think, far be it from me to think I know what God's thinking, but I think that one of the reasons that he's not doing that, he's not doing it the way he did before, is because I think there are a lot more people today. This world's an ugly place, but I think there are a lot more people today who are with God and not wicked than just Noah and his family. They had 8 people who weren't evil at that time. And God has a lot more support and followers and people who love him today. Not that this world is anything close to what it should be, but there are a lot of people who are for him today than there were in the time of Noah. But notice in verse 4 here, he hears something and they say, seal these things up. Now let's get back to Daniel for a moment, chapter 12. Daniel 12. I'm going to read verses 4 through 9. But you, Daniel, and this is Daniel's vision, you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood 2 others, one on this river bank and one on that river bank. And one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Now, this sounds suspiciously similar to what happened with John. Verse 4 of this chapter, just like verse 4 of the other chapter, he says, seal it up. Seal this up until the end. Don't tell anybody. John was standing there in his vision and saw this angel. Okay? And obviously they're described slightly different. John said the angel was clothed in clouds. Daniel says the angel was clothed in linen. Maybe from their perspectives they look similar or something, I don't know. But in Daniel, he saw two figures. And I can't help but wonder if, did Daniel see the same vision, for one? And two, was he seeing John and the angel? Was he seeing both of them? Were they the two figures? I don't know. Another similarity to Revelation is in verse 7. What did the angel do in Revelations? What did he swear? Here he swears by him who lives forever and ever. Again, it seems similar enough that this is probably the same vision. But I want to point out something that it says in here. It shall be for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, there's a lot of symbolic phrasing in time, when time is referred to in the Bible. Sometimes a week is referred to as a set of, or sometimes what is referred to as a week is really talking about a set of years. Sometimes terminology is used that's referring to a whole generation. Sometimes so many days is really referring to so many years. This says a time, times, and half a time. So think of a time as referring to a year. So you've got a time, one, times, two more of them, and half a time, half. So 3.5 years. So let's just keep that figure in mind, 3.5 years. But why is it that God would give Daniel this vision and give John this vision and tell them both, seal it up, seal this book, sealing it for the end? Why bother showing them at all if they can't tell anybody what it is? They're not still walking the earth today, so they're not going to be here to see it anyways. I think it probably gave them a stronger understanding of the things that were coming. I think it gave them a better big picture. But eventually these things will be shared. In the end, they will be shared. It will be unsealed. It will be opened up for people to see. It talks at the end of chapter 10 in Revelation about the mystery of God being finished. So there are things that are sealed up, that are kept secret, that we are not privy to at this time. Someday we will be. And, as with other things in Revelation, it can be frustrating because we want to know what it means. It's like when somebody's keeping a secret from you. You want to know what it is. Come on, just tell me. That drives you nuts. But I actually like that there's cloudiness and vagueness to it, and it can be kind of confusing. Because if I don't see exactly what's coming, and if none of us can figure out exactly what's coming and when, then neither can the guy that's about to get sucker punched when it happens. The enemy doesn't see it coming either. Satan doesn't know. He knows something's going to hit him. He just doesn't know exactly when or how. It's like a surprise attack against him. The sealing these things away makes me think of a sealed indictment. When someone's being investigated, they can make sealed indictments against them so they can build a case. Maybe they're building a case against a bunch of people, because if they just openly do it, they're going to know they're being watched and they're going to be more careful. But if you have a sealed one, you can kind of work behind the scenes and build this case against them and have a good plan of attack. He doesn't know what's coming and when exactly. He's going to get knocked out and not see it coming. So he always has to look over his shoulder. He never knows when it's coming. Talks about this book that the angel has. And this is symbolic of prophetic things to come. Somebody described this book as, well, and possibly even that scroll from chapter 5 that Jesus took. They described it almost like it's the deed to the earth, like the deed to this world, and it's Jesus' symbolic way of taking possession. He's going to come and restore and take possession and make this world fully his again. Take away the reign that Satan has. Let's go on to back in Revelation 10. Go on to verse 8. Then the voice which I heard from heaven spoke to me again and said, Go, take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel who stands on the sea and on the earth. So I went to the angel, and I said to him, Give me the little book. And he said to me, Take and eat it, and it will make your stomach bitter, but it will be as sweet as honey in your mouth. Then I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach became bitter. And he said to me, You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. This to me seems like it's symbolic of him internalizing this message, internalizing what's to come. Take this and hold it within you. He talks about being sweet on his lips, but bitter in his stomach. Don't share this yet. Keep it sealed, but keep it with you. Internalize it. And this bitterness and this sweetness make me think of how the entirety of Revelation of these end times can seem kind of bittersweet. Bitter in the sense that it's scary and it's going to be a rough ride for many people, but sweet in the sense that it's bringing restoration, in the sense that it's there to fix things. It's there to bring healing. We're not quite there yet, but in a couple chapters, we're going to be talking about the birth pains, which is symbolic of the birth, the creation of this new restored place. And much like with any birth pains are painful and a struggle, but something wonderful comes afterward. You have this child. And that's symbolic of what these things are doing and how they're going to be received. It'll be bitter and sweet at the same time. We got to go through some rough things sometimes to get to something much better. Moving on to chapter 11, verse 1. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod. And the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles. And they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands, standing before the God of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouths and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. These have the power to shut heaven, so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy. And they have the power over waters to turn them into blood, to strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. Verse 1 says he was given a measuring rod. Jesus is taking possession. He's coming back to claim what's his. And this passage almost seems like he's taking inventory. You buy a new house, you buy a property, you take stock of what's there, you take stock of what you have. He's taking inventory of his church, of his people, of the kingdom, those who worship there. He's telling him to measure these things, who all worships there. But note that it says the court outside the temple don't measure. And those are the people that aren't his. Those are the lost. He says to take this reed like a measuring rod, and that sounds like a surveyor's tool. Measure this property, measure this and that. It sounds like he's surveying in preparation of something. When do you survey something? When you're about to build. When you're about to build something, you have it surveyed. Jesus is getting ready to build a new world. He's getting ready to build a new temple. He's not just demoing this house for the sake of tearing it down because it's condemned and it's worthless. He's keeping the bones here, and he's tearing down what's damaged to rebuild it into something better. He's not tearing down the world to leave it some abandoned property. Now, these two witnesses, they're going to be talking, where does it say? In verse 2, for 42 months. How long is 42 months? 3.5 years. It sounds like a time, times, and half a time. Verse 3, it says, I will give power, they will prophesy for 1,260 days. How long is 1,260 days? 3.5 years. A time, times, and half a time. This 3.5 years is referring to the first half of the tribulation. But these witnesses are going to be here to share God's truth, to prophesy, and they're going to have power to, it says to shut up heaven so that no rain falls, to do things similar to the plagues we heard of in Egypt, turning water to blood, striking the earth with plagues. That's why some people, different scholars have different ideas about who these are going to be. I don't think we know for sure who they are. I don't think we can know for sure who they are. A lot of people think that they'll either be Enoch and Elijah, or they'll be Moses and Elijah, similar to what Moses did in Egypt. But because of these things, they are not going to be very well received. Verse 7, when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit, which we're later going to find is the Antichrist, will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of this great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Then those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and not allow their dead bodies to be put in graves. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry, and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. They're not going to be very well liked. What happened to the prophets that we read about in the Old Testament? And we just talked about this somewhat in Sunday school. People don't like hearing what they don't want to hear. They were not well received. They were often ran off. They were often ignored. They were often murdered, killed, stoned to death. People don't want to hear what they don't want to hear. And at this point, there's going to be a lot of people, the majority of the people are actively enemies of God. They're not going to want to hear these things. So the fact that these two witnesses were killed is going to give them a cause for rejoice, because they didn't like what they had to say. They didn't like what they did and were able to do. But verse 7 says something very important. It says, when they finish their testimony, the beast descends out of the pit and makes war against them, overcomes them, and kills them. They're protected until they get the job done. God keeps them safe for the entire period that they need to accomplish what they need to accomplish. And he does that with us. If he's got work for us to do and it's being done, we're going to be here. He's going to empower us to do it, and he's going to protect us as we do it. And I think it's significant, too, that they lie dead for 3.5 days. And that sounds similar to what happened with Lazarus when Jesus brought him back from the dead. You know, if it was just a short temporary thing, they don't have the medical technology we have now to tell, you know, what kind of state exactly someone's body is in. But if somebody was dead for, 4 hours and they were brought back to life, somebody might think, well, maybe they're just knocked out. Maybe they were in a coma or something like that. But when someone has been dead for 3-4 days, it's very obvious that they're dead. And it shows God's power even more as he brings them back and restores them. We're low on time, so I'm going to go ahead and cut off. But next week, we're going to get into their resurrection, God bringing them back and sending them to heaven, and finishing up the trumpet judgments. But yeah, I'll go and stop there.